The mahogany conference table at Vance and Sterling Aerospace in Houston, Texas, had never felt more like an execution block. My uncle, Charles Sterling, slid the inheritance papers across its polished surface, his heavy gold signet ring catching the harsh office lights like a warning flare. "Sign it, Audrey," he said, his voice dripping with false paternal concern. "It's truly what's best for the family legacy. We need traditional, experienced leadership to navigate the current aviation market." Traditional? That was their favorite code word for keeping power in the hands of the men in the family. I looked around the room at the cold, expectant faces of my father's relatives. Uncle Charles, the self-appointed patriarch since Dad's sudden passing 2 years ago. His wife, Aunt Beatrice, wearing enough diamonds to blind an auditor. And my two cousins, Julian and Savannah, both doing a terrible job of hiding their smug smirks behind expressions of fake sympathy. Only Grandma's seat at the far end remained empty. They had conveniently made sure her medical team advised against her attending this stressful meeting. The papers in front of me were simple, but devastating. A complete renunciation of my inheritance rights to the Sterling Global Fleet, the private aviation empire my grandfather had built from a single hangar 50 years ago. "The terms are more than generous, Audrey," Julian added, his MBA-polished voice echoing off the glass walls. $10 million cash in exchange for your minority shares. That's more than fair considering your limited corporate experience." Limited experience. I almost smiled. They had been so busy watching their own reflections in their country club trophies that they hadn't bothered to check what I'd actually been doing for the past 2 years since losing my dad. To them, I was just the quiet girl in the off-the-rack department store dress who preferred working in the maintenance hangars over attending luxury galas. "And if I don't sign?" I asked quietly. Aunt Beatrice's surgically enhanced smile tightened instantly. "Then things could get very uncomfortable, dear. The board has already raised questions about your late father's final fleet investments. A hostile public audit might destroy his memory." There it was, the threat. They were willing to drag my father's name through the mud and tie me up in legal fees until I was completely bankrupted. What they didn't know was that 6 months ago, I had sat in Grandma Evelyn's private sunroom drinking her special blend of chamomile tea while she explained exactly what she had done. "They think my mind is slipping, Audrey," Grandma had whispered, her sharp gray eyes as bright as ever. "Let them. While Charles is busy planning how to steal your birthright, I've already transferred the controlling interest of the master offshore holding company straight to you. They don't even know it exists." I picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen they provided. My signature flowed across the page smoothly, each letter a calculated step in a game they didn't even realize I was playing. "There," Uncle Charles said, unable to conceal his absolute triumph as he snatched the paper. "That wasn't so hard, was it? Security will escort you out. Don't bother showing up to any future family functions." I stood up calmly, smoothing my blazer. "Actually, I have a lunch appointment, but you all might want to keep your business alerts on this afternoon. I hear the aviation sector is getting some fascinating news." Savannah rolled her eyes. "Still trying to play the mysterious victim, cousin. This isn't one of your little charity projects." I walked to the door and paused, looking back at the boardroom. "You know what Grandfather William used to say? The sky belongs to those who prepare for the storm." I always wondered if any of you actually understood what that meant. The moment the elevator doors closed, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to my legal team. "Execute Phase 1. By 2 p.m., every financial news outlet in the state would run the breaking story. Sterling Global's massive secret merger with its largest European competitor, orchestrated by the company's true majority shareholder, me. Uncle Charles's carefully plotted monopoly on the family empire was about to hit a brick wall, and he didn't even see the headlights. See, Grandma Evelyn's private hospital suite felt more like a military command center than a place of recovery. She sat propped up against crisp white pillows, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, with 3 high-end tablets arranged across her bedside table like battle plans. "Did they swallow the bait?" she asked the moment I walked in, her eyes gleaming with the exact same tactical brilliance that had built Sterling Global 50 years ago. Hook, line, and sinker, I replied, setting my bag down and pulling up a chair. Uncle Charles practically smiled when I signed the renunciation forms. She checked her vintage Cartier watch, the one Grandfather William had given her for their 40th anniversary. It's 1:45 p.m. The markets close in just over 2 hours. Are you ready for what comes next, Audrey? I opened my laptop, my fingers already flying across the keys. Aerojet Continental is announcing the merger at 2 p.m. sharp. Their PR team has been coordinating with ours for weeks. Charles is so busy celebrating his supposed victory that he hasn't noticed his biggest competitor just absorbed the very company he thinks he completely controls. The offshore voting transfers? Grandma asked, tapping her own screen to pull up the final digital seals. Completed last night, I confirmed. Grandfather always knew Charles would try a hostile takeover once he was gone. That's why he left you the controlling interest in the shadow-holding firms, the exact ones that just became the largest majority shareholders in Aerojet Continental. Everything was proceeding exactly as we had mapped out over the past 2 painful years. While Uncle Charles and his children were busy playing corporate royalty, flying on company jets to private islands, Grandma and I had been quietly consolidating power through an international web of holdings so complex it had taken 3 separate global law firms to structure. Right on time, my phone buzzed. It was a frantic text from Savannah. Turn on CNBC right now. What did you do? I reached for the remote and switched on the hospital room's television. The financial anchor's voice filled the quiet room. Breaking news in the aviation sector as Aerojet Continental announces a surprise multi-billion-dollar merger with Sterling Global Aerospace through a complex series of offshore acquisitions. The blockbuster deal effectively consolidates control of the private charter corridors across North America. Grandma turned up the volume as the anchor continued, a prominent graphic of my face appearing on the screen. In an unexpected twist, the merger appears to have been entirely orchestrated by Audrey Sterling, granddaughter of founder William Sterling, through a previously unlisted family trust company. Instantly, my phone exploded with notifications. Calls and texts from Uncle Charles, Aunt Beatrice, Julian, Savannah, and panicked board members flooded my screen. Everyone who had sat completely silent while Charles tried to throw me out of my birthright was suddenly trying to reach me. Should I answer? I asked, looking over at Grandma. She shook her head, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Let them sweat, darling. Charles never could handle being outplayed, and he'll be here soon enough. Sure enough, barely 20 minutes later, the heavy suite door burst open. Uncle Charles stormed into the room, his face a furious shade of red, his perfect custom suit slightly disheveled. Behind him, Aunt Beatrice and my cousins huddled together like a chorus of designer outrage. What is the meaning of this? Charles demanded, waving his phone wildly as the stock ticker showed Sterling Global's valuation skyrocketing on news of a merger he hadn't authorized. I looked up calmly from my laptop. I believe the press release explains it quite clearly, Uncle Charles. We are merging. The combined entity is now the largest private aviation consortium in the country. This is legally impossible, Julian sputtered, stepping forward. We have your signature. You signed away your rights to the Sterling assets 30 minutes ago. No, I corrected, my voice dropping into a cold, absolute calm. I signed away my direct personal shares in Sterling Global. But Grandma's offshore holding firms, the ones that actually control 57% of the master voting blocks, those weren't mentioned anywhere in your carefully worded contract. Savannah's designer heels clicked sharply against the floor. You can't do this. The board will never approve it. The board already has, Grandma interrupted, her voice cutting through the room like polished steel. Check your devices, Charles. The emergency proxy vote was completed 15 minutes ago. Audrey's holding company now officially controls the merged entity. Uncle Charles turned to her, the terrifying realization finally dawning on his face. You helped her do this? While playing the frail, sick patient? frail. Grandma laughed softly. Charles, I've been running the core infrastructure of this empire from hospital rooms for 2 years. Your father taught me how to fly a plane and build a business long before you were born. Did you really think I'd sit back and let you rob his granddaughter? Aviation needs strong traditional leadership, Aunt Beatrice protested, clutching her expensive leather handbag like a shield. Traditional? I stood up, closing my laptop. You mean like loyalty, integrity, taking care of your own? Because from where I stand, you all abandoned those traditional values the moment you saw a profit in my father's tragic death. I pulled up a final document on my laptop and turned it to face them. This is a detailed forensic audit of every questionable financial decision you, Charles, and you, Julian, have made since taking over the board 2 years ago. Every inflated private jet lease given to your friends, every conflict of interest hiring, every misplaced operational fund. Did you really think nobody was watching? Uncle Charles's face went from furious red to a pale, terrified gray. You're bluffing. Try me, Charles. I met his gaze steadily. The lessons Grandpa had taught me about hiding your moves filling my voice. Let's see how the SEC and our new Euro partners react when they launch a full hostile investigation into your activities over the last 24 months. Let's see how the shareholders feel about that. The hospital room fell completely silent, save for the continuing ticker updates from the television, showing the stock price hitting historic highs. What do you want? Uncle Charles finally managed to ask, his voice sounding hollowed out. I sat back down, smoothing my department store blazer. The same thing I've always wanted, Charles. The thing my father worked for, what Grandpa built. A company run with honor, not ego. You all have a choice to make right now. You can work with me to build this new ethical empire, or you can cash out, resign from every board position, and walk away before the auditors start knocking. Julian let out a bitter laugh. You expect us to work for you after this? No, I corrected again. I expect you to work with me, or find a different industry to exploit. Your choice. Grandma pressed a button on her bedside, calling in the head nurse. I believe that's quite enough corporate governance for one day. Audrey, dear, would you mind having security escort them from the suite? They have some decisions to make. As they were being led from the room, Uncle Charles turned back one last time, his voice choked with defeated rage. You planned this. You planned this all along, every single step from the hangar to the boardroom. No, Uncle Charles, I replied, looking out the window as a private jet cut through the clouds, bearing our new corporate logo. You planned this when you decided I wasn't worthy of my father's legacy. I just decided to prove you wrong. The morning of the main press conference at the Vance and Sterling Aerospace headquarters, I stood alone in what had once been my father's vast corner office. Now it was mine. I adjusted my mother's vintage gold watch, not a flashy piece, but a quiet statement of elegance that told its own enduring story. Ms. Sterling, my new assistant appeared at the door. They're ready for you in the auditorium, and your family is already here. Excellent, let's go. The main conference auditorium fell into a heavy, suffocating silence as I entered. At the head table sat the new combined board members, including executives from Aerojet Continental. But the seat that drew every camera's focus was Grandma Evelyn, poised and bright-eyed in her wheelchair. Good morning, I said, stepping up to the podium and looking out over the flashing cameras and hundreds of journalists. I want to thank you all for coming. Before I deliver my formal statement on the future of Sterling Global, I'd like to address some internal family matters. I opened a thick folder, a few papers catching in the morning sun. These are the final signed resignation letters from Charles Sterling, Beatrice Sterling, Julian Sterling, and Savannah Sterling. Effective immediately, they are cashing out their remaining equity and departing all management roles within the merged aviation consortium. A ripple of shock went through the room as my family sat perfectly still in the front row, looking years older than they had just days ago. This is not a moment of revenge, I continued, making eye contact with every skeptical board member. It is a moment of necessary transformation. We are returning to the core principles Grandfather William built this empire upon: honor, trust, and the unwavering belief that the sky is not the limit. It's just the starting line. Later that afternoon, after the buzz had settled, I found Grandma Evelyn sitting peacefully in Grandpa's old study, surrounded by models of vintage aircraft. "He would have loved how you handled the final landing, Audrey," she said, her voice warm and filled with pride, with grace, strategy, and not a single word wasted. "I learned from the best, Grandma," I replied, sitting across from her. "You and Grandfather knew Charles would try this all along, didn't you?" She smiled, sipping her tea. "William knew. That's why he structured those offshore firms before he even met Beatrice. We spent years setting up the framework you finally flew into. But you needed to prove yourself, Audrey. Not to us. We always knew. But to yourself. Besides, watching Charles dig his own corporate grave while believing he was constructing a throne was rather entertaining." I looked out at the Houston harbor, where our new private terminals were buzzing with activity. I had won the chess match, but now came the real work of leading, of building a legacy that truly honored my father and Grandpa, one calculated decision at a time. I had learned from the very best, and the real flight was just beginning.